Part 1, Chapter 4 of Canada's 100 Days with the Canadian Corps from Amiens to Mons, August 8 to November 11, 1918. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sławek Księżycki. Canada's 100 Days by John Livesay. Part 1, Chapter 4. The battle opens. So at last all is ready. The story goes that the corps commander was asked how soon could he deliver the corps in fighting trim at the appointed place. By the 10th, he had said. Too long, do it by the 8th. And he did it. An epic feat. It meant hardship. Some units only reached the ground to go straight into action, but everything was there. Every field battery in place, with ammunition to burn, all the imperial heavies, the tanks, great and small, cavalry, supply columns, signalers, ambulances, everything. And it was all done secretly and by night. For an entire week the men of Canada were passing south from their old front, taking circuits and puzzling routes. None knew where they went. They moved by night, sleeping by day, without gossip or undue curiosity. That was essential to the greatest surprise attack the war had produced. They were going into a fight, and they were ready. They sang as they marched, a thing they had not done for 2 years. For most, that night of nights was one sense of wonder at how it had been done, how by many tangled threads of railway and lorry and march, all that great and intricate machine, more complex far than Wellington had gathered on the field of Waterloo, had been assembled in perfect order to the minute. From Canadian Corps headquarters at Dury, a crossroad runs through Saint-Fucien and thence downhill into Bave, where we pass over the Havre. Except for a scurrying dispatch rider, all traffic is going the one way, miles on miles of lorries and dark masses of marching men. The night presents a sky clear and starry, with light just sufficient to illumine the track and silhouette, the regulated avenues of trees inseparable from a French highway. Far above is the drone of our aircraft. Hain is not over, or the curious scene could scarce escape his attention. The white roads are checkered with moving oblongs of black. All Canada is on the march. So down a steep hill into the interminable street of Boves that leads at length to the Havre. It is a puny stream, its ancient stone bridge no bigger than a good-sized western culvert. Later on, our men are to bathe in the Luce, waist deep in its biggest pool. These rivers are poor affairs, but they have been inscribed by the blood of her sons upon the roll of Canada's history. Their trickling streams turn decrepit mill wheels, but their names march on down the generations, the Somme, the Havre, the Luce, the Scrap, the Cogiel, the Sancière, the Scheldt, the Souchier, or the Lys. On the far side lies the hamlet of Saint Nicolas, and thence it is a long climb over chalk uplands to the wood of Jontel. Up the winding hill go all the impedimenta of war marching battalions, traction engines, towing great guns, ammunition trains, long lines of Red Cross lorries, everywhere the pungent odor of petrol. From every little wood belch forth men. They march silently. They might be phantoms, dim hordes of Valhalla, were it not for the spark of a cigarette, a smothered laugh. There is no talking. All is tense excitement. For miles and miles in a wide concentric sweep, every road and lane and bypath is crowded with these slow-moving masses. Over the bare hillsides lumber the heavy tanks, just keeping pace with the marching men. Should the enemy of a sudden lay down a barrage, our losses must be appalling, sheep for slaughter. On these light chalky uplands the recent rain has drained away and the going is good. At length, somewhat footsore, we pass through gaunt village, unhappy Jontel, where stars shine down through skeleton rafters, and all is ruin. Presently the troops are defiling into their appointed place, the Australian support line, for Australian units still man the trenches in front of us, lest an enemy raid give the show away. So rigid have been the precautions that none of the Canadian officers and men on leave have been recalled. Not 4 days later do some staff officers rejoin their headquarters, a bitter disappointed lot. Berlin thinks we are in Flanders, London that we are in the south. All is well. The sky is clear and empty. Only the stars shine down. These and an occasional flicker in the east, and the long-delayed rumble of a bursting shell. For against the eastern horizon is the usual pyrotechnic of trench warfare, neither more nor less. Once every few minutes one of our heavy howitzers sent across a shell, a dull report, and then a wobbling vibration before it steadies down upon its course. More seldom Fritzie makes reply, the perfunctory business of the night, a shrill messenger ending in a roar of explosion. The night is very still. It seems incredible that all this unpreventable hum and bustle can have failed to reach an alert enemy. The watch hand is creeping round 3:30, 4, 4:10, an interminable laggard. It is to be the greatest barrage of the war. What will this stunning experience be like? One can only imagine. 0 is set for 4:20, and the pointer has barely reached that figure when behind us there goes up a mighty flare, and simultaneously all along the line, 10 miles to north and to south of us, other flares light up the countryside. At the same instant there breaks out the boom of our heavy guns, the sharp staccato of 60-pounders, the dull roar of howitzers, and the ear-splitting clamor of whiz-bangs, a bedlam of noise. Shells whistle and whine overhead. They cannot be distinguished one from another, but merge into a rushing cataract of sound. In front, right athwart the horizon, so far as the eye can reach, spreads out a hell of flame and fire and bursting charge, reverberating back to us in mighty unison that the battle has begun. Bright from out this fiery furnace break out quick flashes, shooting into the air and there dividing into twin red balls the SOS call of the German trenches for artillery support. But answer there is none. Our counter-battery work is too perfect. Their batteries are neutralized, not an enemy shell comes across. In that murky inferno all is confusion and terror. For a minute the din is stunning, but the ear quickly becomes accustomed. The heavens are lightened up across their broad expanse by a continuous sheet of lightning playing relentlessly over the doomed lines. Now the faint light of dawn shimmers in the east and soon blots out the fireworks. A lark rises high, carolling. Our own men can be plainly made out walking leisurely, or so it seems forward, tanks lumbering ahead. Already some of our field batteries gallop past hard after the infantry. It is a perfect plan, working out without a hitch. The heavy batteries behind raise the barrage step by step ahead of the men. All is coordinated to victory. Then down comes the fog, blotting out the spectacle but saving many casualties. The attack is such a complete and overwhelming surprise that the enemy's initial defense is feeble. Many of his batteries fall into our hands, wearing their tarpaulin hoods, their crews deep in their dugouts. Our own artillery comes off almost scatheless, except among the galloping whizzbangs, 1-2 ventures being put out of action by a direct hit at point-blank range. By 9 o'clock these field guns are 3 miles inside the enemy front line. 6 hours was set for the lifting of the barrage, but long before that its work is done and the enemy in headlong flight. After them go the whipped tanks, little uneasy beasts of steel and petrol that can do their 12 miles an hour across country when the going is good, and here, over these great rolling uplands and gentle valleys, it is perfect. The fog lifts. It is 8 o'clock. The cavalry, a wonderful sight, appear on the scene. They have come up from Angers-sur-Somme and have lain overnight in the great park of Amiens. Like a jack in the box, they have sprung from nowhere, miles on miles of gay and serried ranks, led by the Canadian Cavalry Brigade, Lancers too, and many famous British regiments. This is the day so long awaited. Surely this is their chance to pass through the broken enemy line, to harry and raid his back area. As is the cavalry way, they do reckless and incredible things, and heavy is the price they are to pay. They pass south of Villers-Bretonneux of bright memory in darkest days of the March retreat, now in the hands of the stout Australians, neighbours on our left. Already prisoners are coming back, in little knots, in squads, in whole detachments, sometimes under guard, oftener left to their own device, mounting soon into the 1,000 slouching figures in field grey, among them grizzled veterans and mere striplings, but for the most part in the prime of life and of good physic. With them a number of officers, some swearing bitterly, others jauntily and spruce, still rubbing the sleep out of their eyes, in good spirits. "You Canadians have no business down here," says one in excellent English. "We were told you were in Flanders. How I would like to hang our fools of intelligence officers." Intermingled with them come our walking wounded. "A good Livesay," cried a grinning lad, wounded in the wrist. "How is it going?" "Fine. You can't see his heels for the dust." "He is in kilts." A Highlander from the Pacific coast, one of the 3rd Brigade. He tells us how a piper atop of the tank Dominion led into action his battalion, the 16th Canadian Scottish. The battle has streamed away to the east, and the battlefield of a few hours ago is as peaceful as an Ontario landscape after storm, whose bolts and flashes still play over the distant horizon. The most striking thing about the battleground is the extraordinary good target our gunners made. This was particularly so along the enemy front line and support. In our northern area, immediately west of Mahzel Cave, this ran over a wide sweep of prairie, pockmarked throughout, with shell holes in regular sequence, like one of those round boards on which children play at marbles. Nothing could have lived there, nothing did live, as it attested by hundreds of Boche dead among the ungardened with. It had afforded good cover to snipers and now to corpses. Here, since March, the tide of battle ebbed and flowed, and the crop will not pay the reaping. Some of our men engaged in mopping up are laden with great store of Boche gear. Hereabouts too we captured many heavy guns. Dead horses testify to the heavy shelling which caught our cavalry as they pushed forward. They offered a clear target to distant gunners. Where a line of infantry, patiently working its way along, is almost indistinguishable from the dun color of the landscape, horsemen stand out boldly against the skyline. This plateau, unlike the heavy wooded area on our center and right, which fell only after a bitter struggle, offers no natural impediment. And the enemy, overconfident of his power in the open field, and with the fixed idea of breaking away from trench warfare, had been to but small pains to dig himself in. His trenches were rudimentary, and the barrage wiped out much of their outline. There was surprisingly little wire. More might have been done, because a vast amount of it was captured. It lay in rolls everywhere. But the Boche was lazy and arrogant. The wondrous Superman caught napping. It was over these trenches our airmen performed so gallantly. They were to aid the attack by bombing the front and support lines, but the mist came down in such dense folds that they must either abandon their job or take perilous risks. So they flew as low as 50 to 100 feet, sweeping the trenches with their machine guns. Their losses were heavy. Extraordinary to relate, an enemy trench mortar secured a direct hit on one of them, cutting it in two. Their crumpled frames lie here and there upon the plateau. Plodding across the fields are little knots of stretcher barriers and burial parties. Occasionally a shell breaks among them, but they carry on their task unheeding. From that high level one looks over what had been the smiling land of France, dotted with bosky villages and grateful church spires. Along these roads children came singing from school, and from this plateau of Santerre was garnered much of the nation's agrarian wealth. Below that eminence in the distant days of peace, the broad valleys shone in the sun like the bright pattern of a patchwork quilt, the many hues of the ripening grain, wheat, oats and barley, millet, wedge and beans, undivided by hedge or fence, but melting one into the other in their erratic little squares and oblongs, undistinguished indeed save by the bright hues of nature's palette. Now all is desolation. The hand of the Han lies heavy on the land. Tottering walls and empty shells are all that are left of the villages. Church towers are levelled in sad heaps of stone and mortar, or less happy, exposed to heaven scarred flanks and desecrated altars. Not a living soul is to be seen, save men in khaki. Upon this road stands a monument to the heroes of the army who, on this spot, made their heroic stand in the war of 1870, mentioning them lovingly by name, officer this and soldier that. It has been torn in two by a shell. Already in a dugout, wherein a few hours before the Boche sat secure, a forward dressing station is established. Here first aid is given to all and sundry, our men and Boche, stretcher cases and walking wounded. Prisoners reinforce our overtaxed stretcher bearers, working in parties under their own officers, good-natured, ingratiating. The YMCA is here too, and serves out indiscriminately hot tea, biscuits, chocolate and cigarettes. There is a little grumbling because the Boche fare as well as our own men, but it is a free handout and the supply seems inexhaustible. Especially are the tired troops grateful for the cigarettes, a scarce commodity. A young farmer from the Ottawa Valley, a walking case, tells of his experiences. He is full of the battle and with difficulty is persuaded to go back. 3 or 4 days, it is all so long ago. Our battalion, the 2nd, was at rest a few miles west of Arras, he says. We knew something was in the air. 2 days before we moved, all the pay books were collected, and when we got them again, a notice was pasted on the back warning us to be careful in our talk with the French people, and ending up with "Keep your mouth shut." On the evening of August 4, we got our moving order and marched about 3 hours to a small station where we entrained in box cars labeled 40 men or 16 horses. We had our rations and banked on the straw. No, we hadn't the faintest notion where we were going, but the talk was back to Ypres. Next morning we passed through a biggish town, and someone said it was Abbeville, and from there until noon the railway followed a river valley. We detrained at a little station where we had tea with our bully beef, and then marched 2 or 3 hours. It was very warm and raining. Finally we came to a village we knew not what. There we had tea and expected to spend the night, but we were ordered to march again. We rested once in the field, and all of us, officers included, supplemented our ration with raw turnips. At about 10 that evening we crowded onto lorries. Once going up a long hill we stuck in the mire and got off to lighten the load. Away back on the main road behind us we could see a solid line of headlights, like a gigantic serpent, endless lorries laden with troops. Early next morning, just after dawn, we got off at a village and marched into a wood where we bivouacked all day. It was full of troops and guns and horses. Showers kept sweeping over us, and the ground was sodden, but we were dead tired and slept most of the day. That evening a few men were picked out from each platoon to stay behind, as a reserve, about enough from the whole battalion to make up a company. For the first time we were served our fresh meat, which we packed along. Then, when evening came, we started a long heavy night march. The roads were choked with moving columns of men, guns and lorries. We passed down a steep hill through a village and at 2 o'clock in the morning came to a wood where we were to stay. Dog-tired, we lay down in the damp and pulled our ground sheets over us. Shortly after sun-up, the Boche started to shell the wood. The whole wood was packed with men like sardines. We ran across the 38th Battalion, another Ottawa unit, and sank out to them. We met many of our old chums and had a good time. We hoped for a day's rest, but that forenoon we were put on fatigue, packing up water and ammunition. We slept in that afternoon. In the evening a canvas bag was handed round to each man, and we were given 2 days' iron rations, with meals and smoke bombs. I was getting pretty well loaded down. For being one of the machine gun unit, I was carrying 20 pounds of ammunition. There were 7 of us. The NCO, number 1 carrying the Lewis gun, number 2 carrying the spare parts, and the rest of us the ammunition. Each platoon was given a map, and our officer and sergeant explained the lie of the land and our objective, and we were told to take particular note of the Lewis River, which we were to cross. This was the first hint we had as to where we were. Some of us had an idea that we were due east of Amiens, but we were further south. Batteries were coming up and taking their positions. At 10:30 we were off again and marched up towards the line, getting to our positions at 1 in the morning of August 8. We understood the British were holding the sector, and were surprised when we heard it was the Australians. Rising ground lay between us and the front line a mile away. We were tired out and opened cans of bully beef and beans and had a little breakfast. Then we lay down, but it was bitter cold. Nobody of men could have been fitter physically. We were in fine trim and excellent spirits, and had confidence the Canadians would go through anything they were up against. But we knew we were in for a hard job, and a lot of us wouldn't be there next night. We weren't exactly keen on going in, but meant to do the job right. Our officer was out in front reconnoitering while we were asleep. He was a fine chap, and we felt he knew what he was about, and we could follow him with confidence. At about 3:45 the corporal came around with a shot of rum, which was welcome, for we were cold all through. At 4:20 a 6-inch naval gun set the ball rolling, followed by 12-inch howitzers and a terrible racket of Wheatsbank battery right in the valley behind us. We waited 25 minutes, our 3rd Brigade jumping off first. They were the Canadian Highlander battalions. The tanks were a great sight. All night long we had heard them puffing and groaning as they took up their position, and wondered why the Boche didn't too. But our bombing planes flew overhead, drowning their noise. We couldn't see anything of the battle because of the slope in front of us, but soon we were off, and as we reached the front line we passed the time of day with the Australian boys. The mist came down, but lifted again an hour or 2 later, and by that time we were working along through wheat fields. Over on our flank we saw some Boche machine gunners beating it back, fighting as they went, and we started to work round them. Our own gun was now in action. Suddenly I spotted a Bosch machine gun 75 yards dead ahead of us. We threw ourselves down and tried to outflank him, but he got me here and killed our number one. Our NCO took the gun and another man my harness and ammunition. Our section commander was hit and he had to go out, but he took with him a Bosch machine gun officer who had surrendered. He was hit in the leg and was leaning on his arm. I beat it out too and ran across this dressing station. There won't be room in the lorries, so after my arm is dressed, I shall hike back to a casualty clearing station. He didn't say much about himself, this lad, but he had been through some of the hottest fighting of the war. Our bar rage, he said, didn't seem anything like so bad as what the Bosch put down on us in March 1917. End of Part 1, Chapter 4. Recording by Sławek Księżycki.